Elizabeth and I'm here to talk about books. Today is the 4th of November, which means that we are well into non-fiction November. And I'm already cheating on my set TBR with other non-fiction books. One of them is At the Existentialist Cafe by Sarah Bakewell, which I started in October but I didn't finish within the month, so I'm carrying that over with me into November. And I also started to listen to an audiobook, which is Astrophysics for People in a Hurry by Neil deGrasse Tyson. But I did do as planned, and I picked up The Art of Memoir by Mary Karr on November the 1st to celebrate the beginning of this month with focus on non-fiction. And I thought today I would be inspired by this book and show you some memoirs and autobiographies that I have read and enjoyed. So let's start with the book that's my favourite of them all, and that is Just Kids by Patti Smith. When I picked up this book, I didn't really know much about Patti Smith at all. I knew she was an iconic musician, but that was about it. I had never listened to her music and I had never read anything she wrote. But I did pick up this book because I heard a lot of praise about the book itself. And also I'm a sucker for memoirs and biographies about people working in artistic professions, and especially the ones where you get to see how they made it, so to speak. And this is one of those books. So in this book we follow Patti Smith from the age of 20, where she moves to New York, and we get to meet the people she meets and see how relationships develop. Particularly her relationship with the artist Robert Mapplethorpe, or Mapplethorpe, I'm not quite sure. I've heard both pronunciations and I'm not sure which one is correct. Anyways, we follow her meeting all these new people and making connections, but also struggling to make art in various forms, and all her failed attempts until she gets to a point where she is a recorded artist. And the people I've seen talk about this book in more negative terms seem to not like the sort of episodic form of it, how it lacks an overarching narrative structure. But that's one of the things I like about this book, and I think for memoirs, for me, the most important thing to like is the voice of the people or the person telling about his or her life. And I very much enjoy listening to Patti Smith talk about her life. So this is one of the very few books I have given 5 stars on Goodreads. And I also very much enjoyed M Train, which is a memoir from a later period of her life, and where this is all about connections and meeting people. M Train is more about solitude and writing and reading on your own. And I enjoy both of them a lot, but this one is my favourite. The second book I want to mention is West with the Night by Beryl Markham. This to me was a random find in a second-hand bookshop in Hay-on-Wye, where I spent a week this summer. But it is in fact one of the books mentioned in The Art of Memoir as required reading. So it is a fairly well-known memoir. Beryl Markham was born in the UK in 1902, I think, but as a 4-year-old she moved to what is today Kenya with her father, and she grew up on a settler farm where her father worked with breeding horses. When she was 16 or 17, her father lost the farm and moved to Peru, and Beryl Markham chose to stay behind in Africa and become a racehorse trainer, which was something no other woman were doing at the time. She did very well with that, and then she went on to become a pilot, and she was one of the first bush pilots in Africa, and then eventually she became the first pilot ever to fly one stop from Europe to America, doing the trip from east to west. She led a remarkable life and she writes really well, so that's a gem of a memoir that I would definitely recommend checking out if you haven't read it already. The third book I want to talk about is The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. This is probably not on the same literary level as the other two, but to me this was just such an emotional read that I can't not mention it in this video. For me, I think this was just the right book at the right time. I felt I was in a rut, and this helped me regain motivation, and it was just so touching and so moving and heartwarming, and I was sobbing my way through reading this, not because I was sad, but because I was touched and sort of regained my faith in humanity for just a little while. And sometimes that's what you need. Another book I want to mention is classified as an autobiography, not a memoir, and it's Under My Skin by Doris Lessing, which is the first volume of her autobiography. The second volume is called In the Shade, covering the years from 1949 to 1962. This covers her early years up until 1949, where she left Africa for England. She grew up in Rhodesia, or present-day Zimbabwe. I've only read this so far, just because by reading this you kind of get to know just how close to her actual life some of her novels are. And I just want to read more of her novels before reading the second part of her autobiography. Again, I like the voice, and I think I like this even more than some of her novels because she gets even more analytical in this than in her novels. She doesn't really have to think about plot and consistency in the same way because she deals with real life, really. But I think she writes really well, and I mean, she's my favorite. I have to mention her. Another book that is slightly related to the previous one is Ingratitude by Jenny Diski. This is a memoir she wrote after being diagnosed with terminal cancer in 2014, and it ends with a chapter written by her late husband from after she had passed away. So this book deals in part with her illness and her cancer and how that developed, but it also is the only one of Jenny Diski's books where she elaborates on her relationship with Doris Lessing. Because as a 15-year-old, Jenny Diski was taken into the house of Lessing, where she was living for a few years, because she had problems at home, and Lessing took her in. And they have this problematic relationship that she talks about in this book that I was not aware of prior to reading this, and it was very interesting reading about Doris Lessing from an outside view, or inside, depending on how you see it, but from a person who was not Doris Lessing herself. Overall, again, just very well written and very readable. The last book I want to mention is The Outrun by Amy Livtrot. This is a book where she explores her coming home to the Orkneys after having spent some time in London. And during this time away from home, she has become an alcoholic, and by now she is battling the addiction, trying to stay sober. And part of that is moving home. So she starts off by moving home to where she grew up, but then she goes off to an even more remote place, not even more remote island, to be completely alone. So in this book we partly hear about her background, how she grew up, what drove her to drinking in the first place, and how that drinking affected her lives and the lives of the people around her. But it's also just a beautiful tale about belonging, about coming home, and a lot of beautiful nature writing, and from someone who is discovering the joy of nature as a new kind of high, replacing the unhealthy one she had from alcohol. So another lovely book that I would most definitely recommend if you haven't read it. So these were the books I wanted to talk about today. You might have noticed, as I did when I sat here with this pile in front of me, that these are only female writers. I have read heaps and heaps of biographies written about men, but apparently when it comes to memoirs, I am drawn to the ones written by women. I don't know why this is. And I have read others by men as well. They just didn't make this list. So, do you have any recommendations for me about good memoirs you think I would enjoy? Please leave them in the comments. And until next time, bye bye.